Hey, folks. Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. He's Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald-Times. This is Mind Your Banners for Wednesday, November 12th. Mike, we're at the point in the year where you're in luck if I can remember what day of the week it is. But we are, I guess, a programming note up top here. We had a very high-level strategy session right before we came on. All the power players at Mind Your Banners HQ weighed in. And we decided that we are going to do a podcast tomorrow about basketball specifically, rather than trying to cram football and basketball both into the Wednesday show. Number one, because there's a lot to talk about with football. And number two, because obviously basketball will play a third regular season game tonight against Milwaukee, 7 p.m. Simon Scott Assembly Hall. So we will be back with a basketball specific podcast tomorrow. Also, maybe get some of Mike's thoughts on Terry Morin's team here early in the season as well. But we are going to be focused. Justin says it is hump day. It doesn't feel like hump day when Mike and I will be working late into the night, Justin. But it's hump day for all of you, and we're so happy that you're spending some of it with us. Talking about IU football, Mike, you were in State College. I guess the first question is very much a broad one. Just kind of like what here now. I mean, we talked in the immediate aftermath, right? You were in State College. I was in West Lafayette, about sort of what it was like to be in that stadium and interacting with Indiana's players and Curt Cignetti after that game. But with, kind of in the cold light of hindsight, just how do you reflect back on maybe what we learned from Penn State about Indiana and what it means to Indiana?
I'm not sure we learned much, because I think it was sort of an extension of what we saw at Iowa and at Oregon. I mean, they had clutch moments there. Their backs were up against the wall. Mendoza made mistakes in those games and bounced back. So I think this was it was further evidence, I guess, that this team has some championship mettle, right? That this team has learned the lessons from last year. That that. I don't know, in tough environments, they seem to be able to play now and show up. And I think we've talked about that's sort of a sign of greatness, of great teams, that they win on the road, that they win against anybody that's in front of them. I think what gets lost about Penn State, we talked a lot about it, but still, 10 guys that are going to get drafted or something around there, and that's not.
Yeah. I would say at least a couple offensive linemen, defensive linemen, both backs, maybe a couple DBs, plus like some injured players, obviously, that weren't on the field. But there's NFL.
So, I mean, they're not going to see that this weekend. They're not going to see that in 2 weeks in Purdue. I mean,
3 weeks.
3 weeks in Purdue. 2 weeks. No, 2 weeks from tomorrow. 2 weeks from Friday.
2 weeks from Friday. Yeah. Do not show up in West Lafayette 2 weeks from tomorrow. You will miss Thanksgiving dinner.
Well, I'll get there early. I can get some more. What was the Ripple?
Oh, that place was really good. Ripple and Company.
And so, but that's sort of what my main sort of thought was on this game. That Penn State obviously was struggling, but the talent's there, and they sort of rallied. And I mean, they did that against Ohio State for a half too. I mean, Ohio State pulled away a little more. But Indiana could too if they had ended up with touchdowns in those red zone spots. I mean, this wasn't that far off from a similar score to the Ohio State game. And so I think that's where you end up with this thing, man. Indiana feels like a team of destiny in terms of reaching the Big Ten title game and getting a bye in the playoffs. For me, that's what this feels like.
Let me ask you, maybe rephrase this a little bit then. Where do you fall on the discussion about basically maybe Indiana seeing some of its flaws versus Ohio State just being so rawly dominant? Tom Fornelli, who does a really good job over at the Cover 3 podcast at CBS, said the way he put it, I thought was really good, because I was listening to some of their discussion of it after the Penn State game. He said last year when Indiana was losing, they lost. And his point was Indiana did not show this ability to pick itself up. Now, some of that's probably a talent gap. I get that. Both those games are on the road, but all these games were on the road. And I mentioned this to you on the podcast on Saturday. It struck me when, Ryan Day was talking about that end of first half sequence where he said this was the first time we really got to simulate a 2-minute drill in a game with anything on the line, because Ohio State was trying to drive down and they eventually got a field goal kind of very late in the half. like, where do you fall on kind of the idea of, on the one hand, Indiana has seen some weaknesses and maybe put some weaknesses on film for the caliber of opponent that it's going to see in December and beyond. But on the other hand, the fact that Indiana's lived through some of this in a way that Ohio State hasn't. And I know that frames maybe some of the Heisman conversation between Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza, but I think even more fundamentally, how do you think it frames the comparison between these two teams that seem to be on a collision course for Indianapolis next month?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've seen, I don't think there was anything new that popped up in that game that was sort of surprising. I mean, like Mendoza's weaknesses, I think, have been on full display at times this season, and you kind of forget about him when he's great. I think the fans forget about them when he's great or when things are going great, but he's not as like Rourke. And this is, I mean, we had this discussion sort of in the preseason in terms of their experience gap. And I think what you saw with Rourke, I think Rourke was more consistent, more of a straight line. The ceiling wasn't as higher, was more of a straight line than Mendoza is, that he's not dropped to sort of, when there's pressure, eyes down, not looking downfield, making mistakes, getting a little frazzled. You didn't see that from him. I mean, because he was, a 5-year quarterback with all, how many, I don't remember how many starts, like 40 plus starts. Mendoza doesn't have that. And so you've seen it, and I think that's why Cignetti talks about, and I think that's where you don't have to read between the lines because he says it, like, Fernando's great. He has another level that he's not there yet, and this is what he's talking about. And I sort of think that if there's a weakness, that's it, right? I mean, the defense didn't, is
that potentially a strength though too? Because Ohio State has not been in those moments. Like, I mean, even last year, Curtis Rourke, and like I remember one time. I was watching one of those Manning cast Monday Night Footballs, and I think they had Matt Ryan on. And so it was just like 3 quarterback nerds just going back and forth. And one of them said, on the one hand, 2-minute is kind of a quarterback's favorite thing because, like, you simplify your play calls. You're going only with what your best stuff is, like with what you know best. And it almost just happens so fast you get to process. On the other hand, the point they made is, there's no simulating those moments. There is no way to consistently simulate, the urgency, the adrenaline, whatever of those 2-minute drills. And like I wrote something that I think is going to publish tomorrow about Mendoza, and I won't spoiler alert it too much. But those 3 drives, he's 12 of 20 for 200. The game winners at Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State. He's 12 of 20 for 215 yards and 3 touchdowns. If you take away the spike in one of those snaps at Penn State, he's 12 of 19. His passer rating, including the spike,
does the spike count as an interception?
It doesn't count even as an incompletion. I believe it does. Yes, I believe a spike counts as an incompletion. If you include it, his passer rating is 199.8. If you remove it, his passer rating is 210.32. Either way, the point is, like, it's less, I guess, I'm asking less about, like, what we know or don't about Mendoza and more about, do you think it's an advantage for Indiana, even having shown some of these weaknesses, that they've also been in these moments that tend to define postseason play?
I mean, I guess it's possible, but I mean, it's also possible that they won't matter at all, because if Ohio State's just winning throughout that game, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, like, there's no way to know if it'll matter or not, really. I mean, it would. I mean, the only way to determine that is if there's a 2-minute drill at the end of the game and Ohio State, just doesn't perform well, and then you can kind of trace it back to maybe not having the experience. But there's also something to be said about a team, it just never faces those situations because they're too good. I mean, I don't know if you're worrying about that if you're Ohio State. I mean,
I think Ryan Day is worrying about it. I mean,
he's framing it.
I think Ryan Day is pretty clearly worrying about it.
I don't know that he's worried. It's an active worry. I just think he's saying it was a benefit to get it. But I mean, would he have rather won by 28 points or rather just been I don't know. Like, yeah, those are good things to have notches on your belt, but the wins are more important, right? You don't care how you get to the win.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not. I think you'd rather learn more about yourself as put it this way. I think Curt Cignetti might sleep a little sounder at night.
I don't think that Curt Cignetti wanted Fernando Mendoza to throw an interception so they'd be tested in the 2-minute drill.
Oh, sure. But
that's what you're saying. You're saying like Ryan Day would rather have those situations happen. It's like, play poorly for 3 quarters and then be tested in the fourth. Like that's just there's no way a coach views it that way.
No, but I think a coach would rather have the lived experience of it.
The Kurt Cignetti would have rather had the touchdowns in the red zone earlier in the game and walked away for this game 34-17. So like I don't think that. Yes, they're a benefit when they happen because you could say like we learned something and we did it by winning, but no coach is like we actively need to get that experience over winning a game comfortably and not having to worry about an upset. And maybe there's question marks about Ohio State.
I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would make that. I don't know that I would make that statement as declaratively as you did, because I think every coach knows, and especially one whose team just has not, frankly, faced like there's. One playoff team that's very much a fringe playoff team that probably on statistical probability won't be in the playoff. That's the only playoff team in Ohio State's faced this season. They did not look great. It was week 1. It was a long time ago. I'm just not sure I would say that as emphatically as you did. I think in their hearts, coaches who are obsessive about controlling as much of the detail of the game as they can are going to know whether they have to, whether they will admit it in the lived experience. They're going to want to know how their team, and in particular, how their quarterback responds in those moments. Indiana has a body of evidence that if it walks out on the field, even in like a 2-minute drill at the end of a first half against Ohio State, it's all of its players are going to be looking at Fernando Mendoza and saying, this guy will get us into a scoring position. This guy's at his best.
Okay, but now you've gone off the rails.
Hold on, no.
Now you've gone off the rails.
Because Ohio State doesn't have that yet. Now, they may get it, but they don't have it yet, and I do think it is something that probably weighs on Ryan Day's mind.
Well, here's why what you said is even crazier. Because because I think – so if you look at Indiana, the reason they got to those moments is because they put a bunch of bad stuff on film. And Kurt Cignetti talked about hating that, and teams use that, and that's what opposing teams, that's what coaches like Ohio State's coaching staff is going to see and be like, man, we have an opening to exploit. The Illinois game was what I think you specifically referenced. Look, people will see our secondary and the mistakes we're making and just start. They would be very happy to see that. And so I think the Mendoza's body of work now, the mistakes he's made in these games, I don't think totally overshadow, the good from the 2-minute drill doesn't overshadow the bad. And the bad is what coaches are going to use to game plan against Indiana. And they've had success about it. I mean, they've almost lost 3 games because of the mistakes Mendoza's made, and they're all very similar things that happen, right? Some of it's the offensive line too. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. Missing Elijah Surratt hurt too this week. Having that security blanket, I think, makes a difference for him. And so I'm not just putting it all on him, but I'm just saying that the way the offense has struggled and what they've put on tape, I don't think you want that to get more 2-minute drill experience or to say we did they got that at Iowa, and I think they would have been happy to just win the games rest of the season handily. I don't think there's more you need to put or more you need to find out about yourself.
I mean, I think one counter, and then I'll move on because we don't need to get overly.
You can double down. You could dig. It's fine.
No. The one counterpoint I would make is that coaches also want to know what the controllables are. The thing that coaches want least of all is the thing that let me rephrase. The thing they fear most of all is the thing they don't see coming, is the thing that they cannot know will happen. If you're Kurt Cignetti, yes, you are angry that you have put that on film. You are fearful of it to some extent. You're preaching against it to your team, but now you also know where your weaknesses are. Now you know where your weak spots are. Now you know where your stress points are. In a way that
I think they already knew
maybe
that.
Ohio State doesn't. And listen, you're right. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe Ohio State just comes in and rolls Indiana, rolls through. There is every chance Ohio State is just an absolute flat track bully through this playoff. They may just be head and shoulders above everybody else in the country. That is an absolute possibility. But we just won't. Ryan Day won't know that until he starts playing, at least until the Michigan game. And then really probably until he gets to playoff caliber opponents is my point. And I think Kurt Cignetti will feel like he has a better idea of here's how my team wins. Here's how my team loses. Here are the things I have to be ready to anticipate intense moments in games.
Well, but that's a different point than you were saying about the 2-minute drill specifically. Because you're saying it's broader.
Well, I was using the 2-minute drill as an example.
I understand, but I'm just saying you're expanding your point now. You're trying to get out of it, and you could also ask this question to Curt Cignetti.
I was too busy following up on your question.
But I'm saying if you're convinced that he will have appreciated having to do 2-minute drills in 3 games this year, you can ask him.
All right. Then maybe I will. Maybe
and you have to answer this honestly.
Next week, right?
You have to preface the question like, I know you're going to try to lie, but don't.
I'm going to preface it by saying we discussed this on Mind Your Banners.
And he'll be like, who and what are you talking about?
I think we do need to talk about Mendoza just in maybe more in the round before we kind of like move on to what's ahead of Indiana. There is kind of this debate. I think it does feel like the Heisman race is starting to crystallize between him and Julian Sayin. I don't think that's fully unfair. Like, at least if you look at like odds, right? And then Ty Simpson's going to get a couple more kind of big cracks at it.
Because they're on the road to at Auburn, right? They got their home at Oklahoma, on the road at Auburn.
Yes, they're on the road to Auburn at the end of the year, and yes, they're home to Oklahoma, and I think they have just like a guarantee game in between.
Yeah, guaranteed game, but then the SEC championship. So he'll have 3 big games to.
Yeah. And it's worth saying, like, unlike, for example, Diego Pavia, who's probably not going to get an opportunity in Atlanta, like Simpson is going to potentially get the same stage that we've been talking about with Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza. Now, it is unfortunate that these things work this way, but like you and I both know, these awards, the narrative around these awards do start to calcify after a while. And it does feel like everyone sort of is setting this up in their own minds as Fernando Mendoza against Julian Sayin for the Big Ten title and the Heisman on December 6th. Like it again, Sayin's efficiency numbers are undeniably better. His whether you're looking at his standard efficiency numbers, his completion percentage, yards per attempt, passer rating, or if you're looking at stuff like expected yards per play, EPA per touch, his efficiency numbers are better. Mendoza, I don't think this is at all unfair to say, has the moments that people will remember, though. Mendoza has, and again, I'm not trying to get into the Gus Johnson given the Heisman now. I know people kind of roll their eyes at that, whatever. That's just
you said you were going to recreate his call. You said you were going to.
I think you said you were going to do that.
Here at the end of the I'm the singer. I don't do calls, so you got to do that.
No, yeah, you said on Monday at the press conference you were going to recreate this with Jeff Kegg, Indiana's SID. He's going to be on here later in the podcast. That's just Gus Johnson emoting in that moment, but it does speak to something, which is that Mendoza does have the moments that will last in people's memories. And I think to your point about Mendoza's strengths and his weaknesses and what Curt Cignetti has said, there's also maybe a feeling like this year, this is not necessarily a comment about their careers more generally, but this year it feels a little bit like maybe Mendoza has it's hard to say the higher ceiling than Sayin because, again, Ohio State just has not been tested in the same way. But we've seen when Mendoza turns it on, he does go to a level that looks genuinely sort of Heisman worthy, NFL draft worthy, that you can see why people see him as that kind of quarterback, even when he has his shaky moments. And it sort of feels like at this point, if you're buying Indiana, you're buying Fernando Mendoza and vice versa, because if Indiana can get his best out consistently, he feels like maybe the biggest game-changing quarterback in the country, other than maybe Pavia because of what he can do with his legs. But I just don't think Vanderbilt's going to be able to give Pavia the stage to really make the Heisman push the way Indiana will with Mendoza.
Yeah, and I also Mendoza probably benefits from everybody not watching all the games, right? I mean, and there's no way you can. It's not a knock. But in terms of like how many people will know that Oregon, that drive, he threw a pick six right beforehand, or how many people will know he threw the interception at Penn State. What the moments will overshadow that because the people might not have necessarily seen all those games, right? And so like those are going to stand out over sort of the miscues he's made, which I do think are sort of detract from his case because, I think, because when you look at the raw numbers, his just don't stack up. But I
don't think that's true. He's 6th in the country in completion percentage. He's tied for 1st in touchdowns. He's 2nd in passer rating behind only Sayan, and he leads the Power 4 in total touchdowns. Like those numbers.
Really worded.
I'm not saying like his numbers are the absolute best, but they do stack up. He's top 10 in EPA and EPA per touch. Like he is at least in kind of the rare air among complete quarterbacks that like the numbers and the performances. And he's also only thrown 4 picks.
Did you do the 3,000? Did you do the 3,000 yards? Like when was was there a Heisman quarterback that's ever not thrown for 3,000 yards?
It has been that's a fair one, and that's generally like true of this Heisman class overall. Like there was a stat running around that wasn't yards; it was like total touchdowns. And the point it made was like if you went back like the last 15 years, you had either guys that just had unreal passing numbers like Baker Mayfield or Joe Burrow, or you had the dual threat guys like Tim Tebow, Kyler Murray, Cam Newton, that like there's just not going to be unless someone explodes. Because remember, the Heisman will not include the playoff. The votes are due the Monday after conference championship weekend. Right. There's not going to be a play. I mean, like if you look at the players who are even like in terms of pure yards in the Heisman conversation, Julian Sayin is probably number 1 in passing yards among that group, and he's at 2491 with 3 games left. Like whoever wins that award is just not going to have historical stats this year, basically.
No, but I mean Mendoza's might not even get close to 3,000, right? Because he has 2,200 right now or something like that.
He has 2342, so he will. I mean, if he has a couple of 300-yard performances in these last 2 games, and obviously this is also where you get into a conversation with Sayin and Mendoza both about the dominance of their teams. And we've talked about the fact that like there's Sayin has basically missed the equivalent of like more than a game's worth of quarters and potential pass attempts. The 6 games that Indiana's won comfortably, Mendoza's thrown 9 passes in the 4th quarter. So they've both been forced to leave some numbers on the field. But I mean, he will be pushing it to break 3,000.
But I think ultimately, like you said, there's no path for him to win unless Indiana wins the Big Ten title game. And to me, that's where the conversation. I'm not pessimistic. I'm
putting it up there.
I was pessimistic. It's realistic. Like I'm in. Like I Mendoza can absolutely win it. They just have to. They have to win the Big Ten title game, and he has to perform well. Like, I think that's that's any kind.
I think there's a world where he can win it if he performs well and Indiana loses close. Because again, like it does. I think if he goes for like 304 scores
and they still lose the game, why would you give it? What? And Julian Sayin plays well and they win it.
No, I think Sayin he would have to clearly outperform Sayin. Is my point. He would have to clearly outperform Sayin.
That's a needle to thread there.
It is, but like we're talking about the Heisman Trophy, like it's a needle to thread to win the Heisman Trophy. Period.
I think that you're not going to convince a general voting block to give it to the loser of a game that they play the other contender. I just can't.
Well, and I think in particular because as I said, it does feel like this game is just like we have just gotten to a place where everyone wants to frame this game as, the 2 best Heisman contender, like the top 2 Heisman contenders are playing one another. And the winner wins the Heisman. And like, what's difficult is, it feels like the likeliest outcome to me in a matchup like that is like 17-14 or 20-17 or something like that. So like, what happens if like Sayin goes for 184 and a touchdown and a pick, and Mendoza goes for like 175 and 2 touchdowns and a pick?
Well, it's like that's not MVP goes to the top player on the top team usually. Like, I mean, it's just this, then Sayin gets it. If Ohio State wins or Mendoza wins.
Or Mendoza if Indiana wins. Right. No, I mean, it again, this is maybe a more philosophical discussion about like what's wrong with the Heisman Trophy, which is that it does feel like there's almost just like this groupthink narrative that gets created at some point during the year, and we all just kind of follow that to the voting conclusion. But I would say this, at very least, it feels like that narrative is going to continue. Like there are a lot of years where we all just kind of decide who the Heisman Trophy winner is by like Thanksgiving, and there's just sort of like, well,
no, I think it's totally up in the air. Yeah,
like we at least are, I think, going to get a genuine Heisman race this year, which is not the case. Listen,
to the point,
like it was obviously Joe Burrow, for example, the year Joe Burrow.
The point about the slugfest, like a 17-14, and neither plays well. Maybe that opens the door for Ty Simpson if he goes off in those 4 games, and that's sort of like because I think he is part of the discussion. I don't think it's just those 2, and with most of these other teams having an extra game more than Indiana to play, there is some more room for them to work to try to create more Heisman moments. Indiana only has 2 regular season games. Mendoza might only play
like 6 quarters.
Yeah. So, I mean, like he's just in a tough spot there. Like his last really ability will be unless they really just hate Purdue, which, I mean, there's a chance. And he, goes.
Well, let me ask you this, and maybe again, this is, and I don't want to get too philosophical in the Heisman, but do you think this is something we might see more of? Because I think coaches, like I think Ryan Days maybe talked about this, that like the learned experience they got from last year's playoff is it's like a whole new season. And if you can save snaps in your regular,
Smitty's talked about like the defense, like they've like how little that they've played. Some games have been good for down the line. Like they've shortened games like in the 4th quarter and just lessened the snap load. I mean, that's not something that Kurt Signetti talked about that too.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I wonder if like when we talk about maybe what recent history would suggest was a statistically less impressive Heisman Trophy winner, whoever it is. I wonder if this is a norm that we're going to have to get used to because teams are going to look to rest these players more consistently and more intentionally when they get the comfortable wins than they might have in a world where you were, at best trying to impress your way into a 14 playoff, if not trying to just sort of thumb the scale for the computer in a BCS title game situation.
What does Alberto's number? Does Alberto's numbers help Mendoza over the top? How much touchdowns?
David says have the Mendoza brothers swap jerseys during the game. It is always funny when like Indiana lets Alberto throw in the 4th quarter of a blowout, and there's inevitably a bunch of like padding his Heisman stats. He's just padding his Heisman stats. All right, Wisconsin.
He did not go. That was an upset already to start the week. He said very little about Wisconsin this week.
That's true. He really did, and I think it. I mean,
you've talked about the history. You want to share?
Well, I kind of couldn't get around it. Like there was just so much to talk about with Penn State, and there was like his own personal, sort of history with Penn State. We got him to open up a little bit on that, on like because his dad coached at West Virginia and he coached at Pitt, and he would have, obviously been on kind of the losing end of some games with Penn State. But no, we did not get the short snapper, long snapper, whatever. I do think there's like he's talked about Luke Fickell before. I do think there is genuinely some respect there. Like I do. I don't know if they like know each other well or not, like if they've come across one another somewhere down the line. Fickell's, I don't know if anyone knows, Fickell's daughter plays volleyball at IU. So just generally like IU as an athletics department is probably kind of, treating this game a little bit with kid gloves. But Indiana's a favorite. Indiana's a comfortable favorite. Wisconsin, to its credit, kind of picks itself up off the mat. I think, they are, and we don't have to talk about this today. I am interested in kind of what Wisconsin is doing, which is basically swimming against the current of just firing your coach the minute things go wrong and trying to sort of keep up with the Joneses that way. They are trying to say, we got the money wrong. Like we did not give Luke Fickell what he needed to succeed. We're going to fix that. We're going to correct that. And we're going to move forward and be better. They beat Washington last weekend, but obviously Washington at home and Indiana on the road are two very separate kind of conversations.
Mind your Badgers. Was there a question in there?
I was leading you into a discussion of Wisconsin. Would you like a statistical preview maybe of Indiana, Wisconsin?
What was that?
I'm on CFB Graphs right now, which is Parker Fleming's website. He's got Indiana as the number 2 team in the country. Wisconsin is the number 67 team in the country. And he's basically got Indiana winning 30-40.
That was just for that. That was just for that. That was the whole reason you did it.
I mean, it could be if my kids were here. And he's got Indiana as a 34-10 winner.
I mean, that's what they wouldn't cover. Great teams cover.
That's a good point. I feel like stats just don't really worry about betting lines.
They don't worry about your feelings. I mean, do you think there's any chance that they lay another egg and it's a close game? I mean, they didn't necessarily lay an egg in Penn State. I mean, that's a tough environment. But do you think they're at risk of? I mean, a little healthier, obviously. Aiden Fisher was back, but still, no, it doesn't sound like Drew Evans, and there's no sort of timeline. He's been very vague. We don't even know what the injury is there. Elijah Surratt, he said obviously they'd know more as the week go on. He did not look. I don't know if people were following kind of my tweets before the game. You know, you could tell that he was not going to play the way he was moving. He was not 100%. And that changes, I think, the complexion of the offense. So, I mean, there are still some injury concerns. I mean, are you worried about this game? I mean, you're the one that was like Michigan State.
I think the only thing that might give Indiana some trouble is Wisconsin is not bad against the run. They have had two pretty bad games. They allowed Iowa 5.8 yards per carry, 210 total yards, and 4 touchdowns a few weeks ago. And when they played Oregon at the end of October, they allowed 4.5 yards per carry, 203 total yards, and 2 touchdowns. The only other team that's rushed for more than 116 yards against them is Michigan. And Washington is, at least in theory, one of the most difficult run offenses to defend because they have the dual threat quarterback in addition to Jonah Coleman, who's certainly one of the top 2 or 3 running backs just in terms of pure talent in the Big Ten.
Well, this Wisconsin team did play Oregon close on the road. What was it, 21?
They did. I mean, it was bad weather, but like Oregon just like kind of lives in bad weather. Like you can't be sitting here and saying like the Pacific Northwest, Oregon's not used to it. And when Indiana has struggled to run the ball and use – not always, but when you talk about, moments when Fernando Mendoza has struggled,
they're better when they're balanced.
Yes, exactly. When they're not asking Mendoza to kind of set the course of the offense just by himself. And so if you are Indiana, I think you look at Wisconsin against the run and you just say, like, we have got that has got to be an area where we make sure we're not out executed. On the other hand, though, again, like if you want to look at like some of the advanced metrics, like Wisconsin's like 64th nationally in points per quality drive. Like teams are still able to stack up good drives against them, even if they are maybe setting them behind the chains or whatever.
And they just can't score enough. That's
the other part of this. And that is, those are the kinds of teams. And Brad, real quickly, Brad Nix asks here, are there any surprises in the playoff rankings? We're going to close by talking about the playoff rankings because we didn't do anything Tuesday night. But like, in terms of the sort of like broad strokes of like what kind of team struggles with Indiana, it's a team that can't score the ball. Because especially in Bloomington, of course, Iowa was able to kind of hold them down a little bit in Iowa City, but especially in Bloomington, if the minute you have to start chasing this team on the scoreboard, like it just disappears.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I just can't see it. I mean, could it be a 21-7 type of game, and Wisconsin pulls out another, like holds it close or at least, I mean, that game wasn't necessarily in the balance at the end. And I don't even know who's starting is it the third string quarterback that's starting for Wisconsin at this point, or because the backup got hurt last week?
Yeah, I
don't even know who's starting.
I mean, Signetti mentioned this week, like their quarterback situation has been a mess because of injuries.
Well, I think he said that Fickle's only had a healthy quarterback like 30% of the time in his tenure. I think obviously Billy Edwards was supposed to be their starter this year, and that would have been had somebody Kirk Signetti was very familiar with, but he suffered a season-ending like earlier, right? Like pretty early in the season-ending injury.
Was it season-ending? I just remember Denny O'Neill going in because O'Neill's a local guy for us. He played, I think, at Cathedral.
Yeah. But the bottom line is just they're not going to be able to score enough points to keep up. And even if Indiana has a bad day in the office, I can't imagine them allowing Wisconsin to get to like 28 points, which is what probably they would need to kind of escape here with the win. That's what Penn State would have needed. And so that to me is kind of the difference. I think it becomes a little easier if Surratt's available. I would say the offensive line is sort of starting to become a concern. Can you maybe rest Benson a week to try to get him healthy? Like his limited movement with that ankle injury that he seems to sort of be dealing with But I guess Zen was banged up in practice. That's why he didn't get the start. He was healthy enough to play, so he wasn't listed on the injury report, but didn't get the practice reps. So Ajani got the start. You're really banged up front, and I do think that is a kind of concern going forward because that's kind of how this team got sunk last year at this time of year, where the offensive line just was playing super well, and maybe they wouldn't have played great. Maybe there was a limitation in talent, but the health really got them, and it sort of feels like that's adding up on the front. And so I think that is an area of concern going into Saturday. Just like, what does this all look like? Is Benson, healthy? Because I mean, with Zen out, they probably didn't have didn't feel comfortable enough to even try something there at right tackle to rest him. And so you got a bye week coming up that'll help. But I think that's sort of maybe my main concern going into this game is that offensive line. The nicks and bruises are piling up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's one where it feels like if you can get through this weekend, maybe you'll be okay because like then you go bye week, Purdue, presumably championship game, and then 4 weeks off. And so you can almost just kind of turn it into like, hey, it's a 2-week season. Obviously a ton of rest during the bye week. Get as healthy as you can for Purdue. Win that game as comfortably as you can. Obviously rest starters where you can.
Do you think
really build for Ohio State? And then you get that like there's always a lot of discussion of would you want the bye? Would you not want the bye? Like 4 weeks is a long time to go without playing. I think Indiana's a team that would prefer the time to rest though too.
But do you think they got housed with the bye with the before the last? I mean, it helps in the sense that you got the Big Ten title game right after, but like the bye in week, what is it, 12?
No, because I think their first bye was really well timed.
That one was timed, yes.
And because it's only this way because of how the season's unfolded, but because of the Big Ten championship. Basically, like I think if you said like the second bye is
contending for the Big Ten title game, the bye is bad.
What?
The timing of it. The timing of the bye is bad if they weren't a Big Ten title contender.
Yes. No, I think you would look at like the first bye as ideal no matter what. I think you would look at the second bye as not great, except in this specific instance that they found themselves in, which is if they win this weekend, then we can start. Like I think you made the point that it is not likely, but it is possible that Indiana could clinch a place in Indianapolis this weekend. And we certainly at least start really, shading out boxes in terms of like scenarios that could keep Indiana out of Indianapolis if they win this weekend. So I think purely because of the way the season's unfolded, I think that second bye has helped. Basically.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. Do you want to start the CFP discussion?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of close with that. I know you were at women's basketball on Tuesday night, so I jumped on the conference call with Mac Rhodes. Needless to say, there was a lot of discussion of Texas A&M and Indiana. We've talked about this. This probably matters a lot more for A&M than it does for Indiana because I don't know that there's a difference in Indiana's mind between the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl if they lose the Big Ten title game, whereas there's obviously a difference for Texas A&M between the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl. For people who don't know, if we assume, and we'll talk about why maybe we can't in a second, but if we assume that the top four right now is assuming everyone holds serve, the top four after the two title games, even for the losers, then the winner of the Big Ten gets the rose, the winner of the Big Ten or the SEC gets the sugar. The next highest ranked team would get the closest bowl geographically to their campus. For Indiana, if Indiana were 3, that would be the Cotton Bowl. If Indiana were 4 and A&M were 3, obviously A&M would get in the Cotton Bowl and Indiana would go to the Orange Bowl, which is the fourth quarterfinal this year. Again, I think that probably matters a lot more for Texas A&M, understandably, than it does for Indiana. But that is the only, I think, real intrigue for now. Now, obviously, games still have to be played. It was interesting that Mac Rhodes basically admitted if you lose your conference championship game really badly, that is going to have to, like the committee will have to consider that in the room. Also, as Brad points out, A&M could still lose. Georgia, I think, has Texas this weekend. I think it's in Athens, but then Georgia's also got to play Georgia Tech at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta at the end of the year. So, there's still some shuffling in that top 5. It does feel like the top 5 in the committee's mind is pretty solid right now. I would say it seemed like last week Indiana was maybe in the committee's mind closer to Ohio State, and this week Indiana is closer to Texas A&M. But we're splitting hairs, and it still feels like the path to a bye is pretty open for IU, even if they lose in Indy.
Well, didn't he say a line that he talked about the conference championships? And said, it doesn't hurt you. It won't hurt you.
Well, what he said was, let me see if I can find it in my notes.
He tweeted it. He tweeted the quote. The exact quote.
He said, where did he say this? He said, by the way, he called it the second longest conversation in the room was
between Texas A&M and Indiana.
Yeah, the longest, I believe, was Ole Miss and Texas Tech, because Ole Miss got dumped down just one spot for Texas Tech to move up after they beat BYU. He said, we look at it as a positive. If you're playing in the championship game, it's another data point. And then I missed a little bit of the quote. And he said, obviously, if you win it, that's a plus. If you lose it, theoretically, it's not supposed to hurt you. He did clarify that without being asked. He said, could it hurt you if you lost heavily? He said, candidly, that would be a conversation in the room. So basically,
that's what we've been saying all throughout. If you avoid a blowout, you're fine. It's not going to.
Then you probably hold on to the bye even if you lose.
Right, and I think that should be the goal no matter what. Honestly,
but the flip side is, we say that, right? You're right. That should be the goal. Well, if Georgia loses to Texas and Texas Tech loses the Big 12 title game, then there's only so far you can fall, right?
And there are other results that could even insulate them. If they did get blown out and all these other results break their way, it won't matter. They're still going to be the top 4. So, they're in a good, I think bottom line is you look at the first 2 set of rankings and you could say, Indiana's in a really good spot for a bye, no matter what happens from here on out, barring a loss at Wisconsin and Purdue, right? Something unexpected. And so, and that's exactly where you want to be. And I think, you kind of joked you were not enjoying your experience on the conference call because that was a little boring. And I think it speaks to the idea that Indiana is no longer sort of not being taken seriously like they were last year. I just felt like the committee just didn't know what to do with Indiana.
Yeah.
The record aside, success aside, they were like, is this team for real? And then they lost to Ohio State. And then those doubts I think were ever present, right? Even though they felt good about putting them in the field, I think it was a struggle to sort of place them against the competition that they were similar to, because they had better records than teams that were ahead of them. And so, but this year, look, it's fair to have the 3 undefeated teams having robust discussions about them, and but Indiana's not at a risk of getting jumped by an Ole Miss or somebody like they would have been last year, where their record's better, their performance is better, but they're they just suffer from that inherent maybe bias against kind of what they've been like through that history. It's not a problem anymore. Saghetti's sort of the track record that this team has built this year, I think, has put them in a really good spot for the college football playoff discussion, and it's right where they need to be, because you definitely want to secure. I think at this point it'd be a disappointment if they didn't lock up a bye. Right? Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
So, and that's where we're at.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good place to end. We'll be back tomorrow to talk a little hoops. But for now, for the Indianapolis Star, for the Bloomington Herald Times, for Mike Niziolek right there, I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Banners. Thank you, everyone who joined us live. Thank you, everyone who watched on the YouTube channel. Please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you, everyone who listened wherever you get your podcast. Please remember to rate us and leave us a review there. That obviously helps as well. We will be back tomorrow to talk a little bit more hoops. But for now, I'm Zach Osterman. We'll talk to you soon.